So we're extraordinarily excited to keep partnering with Skip for that. Today's theme is Vote and the Choice is Yours, and we're so excited that our guest, Professor Natalie Bullock-Brown, was able to make it. We've actually had Professor Bullock-Brown with us before to speak about this film, and that was 6 years ago, so we're really glad to welcome them back. Professor Bullock-Brown is an award-winning and Emmy-nominated producer and a teaching assistant professor in interdisciplinary studies here at North Carolina State University. She is a director-producer of Bartman, Beyonce, and Me, a documentary work in progress that explores the impact of beauty ideals on Black women and girls, and is a producer on award-winning filmmaker Byron Hurt's upcoming PBS documentary, Hazing. Natalie is also a story shift strategist for Wilmington, North Carolina-based Working Films, where she guides the organization's work in ethical and accountable documentary storytelling. She is a regular contributor to Back Channel, a monthly segment on the North Carolina public radio program, The State of Things. And for more than a decade, Natalie was an assistant professor of film and broadcast media in the Department of Media and Communications at St. Augustine's University in Raleigh. She also served as co-host of Black Issues Forum, a public affairs program on UNC-TV, North Carolina's statewide public television network. Natalie was also an associate producer on documentary filmmakers Ken Burns' 10-part PBS series, Jazz. She has a Master of Fine Arts in Film Production from Howard University and a Bachelor of Arts in English from Northwestern. So, we're very happy to have Professor Bullock-Brown. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming back. Just as a reminder, we have over 200 AV Geeks compilations available for checkout at NC State University libraries. Should you not want to visit a library at this moment, or should you not have the ability to check out materials from us, you can also visit avgeeks.com or search for AV Geeks in YouTube or at archive.org for more stuff like this. But now, I'd like to hand it over to Skip. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm just going to go ahead and apologize for muting you for my introduction. Accidentally. Technology it's a bear. And so thank you for bearing with us. I'm so happy to have Natalie Bullock-Brown with me. We showed this film many years ago at Hunt Library in person. And this is a fascinating film because it's North Carolina made. And it was probably shown on public television. This is part of the North Carolina Film Board that was created during Terry Sanford, who was governor at the time. And he modeled the film board very much after the National Film Board of Canada. And he actually kind of brought in one of the people that used to work with the Film Board of Canada to help kind of create the North Carolina Film Board. And I have several films from the film board. But what was particularly interesting was the series that they did called Minority Report, where they actually went to historically Black colleges in North Carolina and had the students there kind of do these short documentaries about issues related to race in the mid-'60s. It's a phenomenal thing. They went to Fayetteville State, which we're going to see in this film, but they also went to, I think, A&T and Central, I believe, and then also there was a women's college in Greensboro, whose name I'm suddenly spacing on. But all these are really...
Bennett?
Yeah, Bennett, exactly. Bennett College. And so it's really kind of fascinating to see these films because they're trying to talk about what's happening currently back in the 60s, but they're amazing documents of what was going on at that time. And we can use hindsight to kind of go back and look and see how these things played out. I was very honored to go with Martin Johnson, who's written about this subject. He's a professor at UNC, and we actually showed the film at Fayetteville State University last year. And we were hoping that people that were in the film would show up and kind of talk about the experiences. But what we got people that knew people that were in the film, and so they were able to talk about the experiences, and some people from the neighborhood. So this is a really fascinating film. It kind of talks about, part of it's in the studio, but also part of it is kind of man on the street interviews, where they go around and ask people if they're going to vote in the upcoming presidential election. So let's go ahead and watch it, and then Natalie, I'm sure, has lots of things to talk about and that we can talk about together. So here's Vote, and the choice is yours.
Do you plan to vote in the coming election?
I do.
Do you think that your vote is important?
Yeah, of course I do.
Why do you think that your vote is
Because I'm a
important?
taxpayer, for one thing.
Do you think that the election this year will be more or less based on a racial overtone?
Possibly.
Why?
Who knows? Move, Cookie.
Well, what's your occupation?
Housewife.
Is your husband registered?
No, as far as I know he is.
Does he plan to vote in the coming
No.
election? He doesn't. Well, do you think that, why? Why?
Well, that's his business. I didn't ask him why. If he doesn't want to, that's his privilege. That has nothing to do with me, of course.
Well, you are going to vote
Yes,
because you believe your vote is important.
of course. But not for Goldwater. If it makes a difference.
To sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men. So spoke Abraham Lincoln 100 years ago. A century later, 1964, was the year of the landslide election, when men indeed spoke out. A memorable year for American Negroes, too. There were street demonstrations, a new Civil Rights Act was passed, and more Negroes registered and voted than ever before. In North Carolina, 150,000 Negroes went to the polls and cast their ballots. In 4 southern states, the Negro vote surpassed the Democratic plurality. In all the South, a 3/5 rise in Negro registration during 2 years. Before that election, students at Fayetteville College, North Carolina, set out to analyze the voting habits of Negroes in Cumberland County. Many students had campaigned for human rights through Carolina streets during the past 4 years. Would their elders now climax the struggle with the most eloquent demonstration of all at the voting booth and the ballot box?
Cumberland County, of which Fayetteville is now the chief commercial city, was settled in 1754 by Highland Scott. Negroes have been living in the county since it was settled. Far back as the Revolutionary War, there were Negro men from Cumberland County area, such as Louis Rebels, John Lomax, Thomas Bell, and many others in the Army who served faithfully and fought gallantly for the cause of American independence.
During the Reconstruction period, there were some Negroes who participated in the legislature and who were elected to different posts. In fact, one was Secretary of State and one made it, and a few, I believe 2, made it to the Senate of the United States. However, for the most part, these were rare instances, and the Negro was not really a power factor in the Reconstruction governments. Today, we do have some outstanding Negroes in government, and we know as a minority group the Negro cannot play a dominant role in government, but we are present in the realm of government today and politics.
In examining a report listing the number of white and non-white voters for North Carolina in 1961, we found that Cumberland County showed 25,173 whites registered, which represents 40.2% of the potential white voting population. The number of non-white registrants was 5,097. Representing only 24.3% for the non-white. The difference in the proportion of white and non-white registrants was 15.9%. Now looking at the state as a whole, Cumberland County represents 1.9% of North Carolina's total voting population. In a simpler perspective, only about 1 of every 7 of the county's potential non-white voting population are registered. as compared to 1 of every 3 for the white.
An essential part of first-class citizenship is the use of the vote. In order to find out more about the Negro voting habit in our area, students from several departments of Fayetteville State Teachers College conducted a survey which entailed a sampling of 500 Negro adults, male and female, in Cumberland County. Through the employment of the interview technique, a random sample of 500 persons was interviewed. Typical of questions asked respondents were, have you ever registered? Which 54% responded yes, 46% responded no. Do you plan to vote in the next election? Was another question asked respondents. 72% answered yes, 28% responded no. Do you think your vote is important? Was another question asked respondents. 85% responded yes, 15% responded no. This survey was made on Saturday, March 21st, 1964.
The majority of the skilled workers are registered voters, and they expressed a variety of opinions concerning the importance of the vote.
Well, I think it's important because it's my privilege as an American citizen to vote. And say vote and the choice is yours or ours, you know.
Now, do you think that your vote is of any particular importance in this election?
I think so.
Why?
Because I'm going to use it.
Yes, sir. Well, have you ever voted before?
Since I've been 21 and eligible, I have voted.
You have?
Yes. My choice, of course.
Well, I think everyone's vote is very much important, and maybe like one voter having enough to win the election.
Oh, I think every vote's important. Yeah. Every vote means just that many more. I really think everybody should vote one way or another.
They take the attitude that a voteless people is a hopeless people, and that voting is an insurance against apathy, insofar as elected officials are concerned.
Now, why do you think your vote is important?
Why do I think it? Because I believe in my race.
Sir?
I believe in my race.
Well, have you ever voted before?
Sure.
I've been fighting hard for civil rights, and I think this election means a little bit more.
Well, do you think that the Negro's vote is important?
Yes, I think everybody's vote is important.
Why?
Just because it's the freedom of religion, speech, and your right to vote. And you should vote. Everybody should vote.
Well, have you ever voted before?
I have.
Well, I think everybody's vote is important. I don't think we can criticize how the government is run or what's done about it unless you do, vote.
Well, have you ever...
I can't say, well, the government isn't doing things like I'd like them to. Naturally, they are. They won't ever be, but until I do something about it, then I can't complain.
Well, have you ever voted before?
Oh, yes. Ever since I was 21. I haven't missed an election yet.
Okay, thank you very much.
Those skilled workers who do not vote listed several reasons for not voting. The element of fear was not absent from the skilled laborer category.
Well, now, would you like to vote?
No comment.
Are you registered to vote?
I don't have to say that.
Do you think that your vote is important?
Tell me why you're asking me that.
Well, you've never registered then before.
Concerning economic reprisals, I distinctly remember one instance in which we interviewed an unskilled laborer. He refused to answer any of our questions because he feared that if his employer knew that he had voting interest, he would be fired. Also, during the course of our survey, we found that because they are a minority group, the Negro feels that they are outside of the realm of politics. Now, for this reason, he has not exercised his voting right because he feels that by voting he will not alleviate these injustices which have been done him.
Looking now at the attitudes toward voting among the professional people, there were 5 persons listing occupations which placed them into the professional category. All of these respondents are registered voters. They feel that as citizens, this is a part of their civic responsibility, and that their votes may help to decide whether a qualified or unqualified person will serve as their representative. These respondents feel that voting is the only way that responsible citizens can voice their opinions in a representative democracy.
Do you think that this election is any more important than any other?
Well, I would say that all elections are important. I would place as much as importance on this one as I have any other one, I would believe.
Now, do you think that your vote is important?
Certainly.
Why?
Certainly. Without the vote, you have no choice. The vote gives you a choice. It's up to everyone to vote and make the choice, the right choice.
Well, you have voted before then?
Certainly.
All right. Well, do you mind if I ask you what type of work you do?
I teach school.
Do you think your vote is important?
Sure, yes, sir. I think everybody ought to vote.
Why do you think it's important?
Well, I think we ought to vote if we ever expect to have rights to facilities and one thing and another. I think everybody ought to vote.
Well, have you ever voted before?
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, sir, what's your occupation?
Pastor.
You're pastor.
That's right.
The unskilled category was composed of 414 respondents. When asked, have you ever registered, 56% of these respondents said yes, while 44% said no. The no respondents listed the following reasons for not registering and voting. First, they did not subscribe to the platforms of the various candidates. Second, they have voted in previous elections, but the candidates did not put into practice what was stated during the campaign. Third, they were afraid of economic reprisals from employers. Fourth, they did not vote because they were of the opinion that they were not regarded as first-class citizens in North Carolina and the United States. Fifth, they were aware of the fact that very few members of their race were appointed by these candidates to positions with recognized social statuses. Almost invariably, each respondent wanted his children to grow up in a well-defined democratic society and exercise the power to vote. They further stated that they were desirous of their children becoming first-class citizens and holding public offices. Some expressed skepticism in the American democratic process. A farmer did not know why he did not vote. Nevertheless, he felt that the importance of the vote was a simple matter of arithmetic. 1 plus 1 plus 1, and so on, equals a large number. One housewife remarked she never thought about voting. This indicates how apathy in public responsibility can become a habit.
Well, now, have you ever voted before?
No, I haven't.
Why?
I just hadn't.
Well, have you ever wanted to?
Yes. I just didn't take the time to vote, I guess.
Yet these same respondents knew that voting gave the individual the opportunity to help put the right person in office. A laborer admitted that he did not understand registration procedures. Nevertheless, he understood the importance of the vote. According to him, any vote is important if you know what you're voting for.
How do you mean, wait for that?
Well, for better.
During the survey, we interviewed quite a few people who thought that the candidates were only trying to get more Negro votes by offering and promising the Negroes things during their campaign. But they also stated that once these candidates were in office, these promises seemed to be forgotten completely. Of the persons interviewed, 41 were placed in the semi-skilled category. 69% of this number had registered, while 31% did not feel the need to register. Slightly over half of the semi-skilled respondents gave reasons as to why they did or did not vote. Those who did not vote implied no interest, excuses,
or even contempt. They express varied opinions concerning the importance of the vote. A public worker who did not vote used the excuse that his children occupied most of his time. A machine operator who voted believed that his vote was just as important as anyone else's vote. One laundry worker responded that she never took time to vote, but she also explained that her vote could help elect a candidate into public office. Two city workers who voted believed that the ballot would help improve the general conditions of the Negroes if the right candidates could get elected. Several semi-skilled workers who did not vote still remembered an often repeated American idea: one vote can make the difference. Most voters, however, explained that their votes were important in order to get the things that they need, or it helped to get the right people into office.
Help them get better jobs, for one thing.
Well, I think everybody should have their rights.
We need to vote and to know how to vote for the things that to make our conditions better.
At least to get a better education. The Negro is more qualified now than he was years ago. And they are doing much better now, each and every day, in the educational field.
The percentage of semi-skilled workers who had not registered or voted felt that they would do so if they could be convinced that the candidate was earnest and sincere in his campaign for equality.
In most cases, the Negro realizes that he does have a civic responsibility. In the rich history of Cumberland County and the city of Fayetteville, this responsibility has been met and surpassed by men such as Henry Evans, Matthew Leary, A.J. Chestnut, Dr. E.E. Smith, Dr. J.W. Seabrook, and other professional and businessmen of the community. A survey of 500 Negro adults was taken in Cumberland County. This survey revealed a sampling of the attitudes of the Negro toward voting. The majority of the skilled and the professional persons interviewed were registered voters. Not only did they know the importance of their vote, but also they felt their obligation as responsible and interested citizens to exercise their suffrage. The 69% of the semi-skilled respondents who voted tended to be more interested in the candidates than in the issues. The 31% who did not vote rationalized with excuses relative to lack of time, lack of interest, or lack of confidence in candidates. Among the interviewed in the unskilled category, the voters were in the minority, although all realized the significance of the vote. Economic reprisals, skepticism of candidates and the democratic processes, apathy, and an induced feeling of second-class citizenship were the reasons given for not voting in this category. However, they all stated a sincere hope for first-class citizenship for their posterity.
Most Negroes have become what we call independents. Also, the voting consciousness of the people interviewed rose with the socio-economic level, which is some indication that the higher the income or educational level, the more the individual is inclined to participate in elections.
Well, there's quite a few of the Negroes have registered within the last, say within the last 2 or 3 months.
Well, I consider all elections important because it's a part of our democratic way of life.
Well, why do you think that your vote is important?
Well, that would help. I feel like it would help. If I didn't think it would help, I wouldn't want to vote. Well, I want to help President Johnson.
Now, are the other members of your household registered?
Yes,
Do they plan to vote in the coming election?
I guess so.
Well, now, do you know how they feel insofar as the racial
The same as I
overturning?
do.
The same as you do?
Yeah.
I think the election for Mr. Goldwater is fine.
Well, we should all vote for Johnson, I believe. That's the way I'm going to vote.
And directly, I mean, I'm I'm Democratic. I vote Democratic, but I think it is.
Well, have you ever voted before, sir?
No, sir.
You haven't. Why not?
Haven't had a chance. Privilege.
Sir?
Haven't had privilege. No.
No, I'm not old enough.
Oh, you're not?
No.
Why not?
Just don't intend to vote.
Sir?
Just don't intend. Why?
Well, if everyone took that attitude, it would be millions of votes not cast.
I sure enough do.
Why?
Because God made me, just like he did the white man.
Pardon?
I think I'm important. So is my vote.
I have voted regularly since I began. 21.
All right, thank you
And
very
I
much.
won't say how many years it's been.
One attitude emerged strongly from the questionnaires. The Negro now seeks to win his basic rights by gaining political strength. His support will go to the party and the candidates who show a genuine concern for Negroes' problems.
Particular election bears a significance to the Negro.
I think this election not only bears a significance to the Negro, but every citizen of the United States.
Why?
It is not only a national election for us, but it is a local and a state election. Not only in this election will we be voting for the President of the United States, we will be voting for the Governor of North Carolina, and we have a special account because we are voting for an auditorium of Cumberland County.
Do you think that the Negroes realize the importance of a vote?
I am sure that most of the Negroes, I should say, about 99.9% will come out to vote. I don't think you can get any better than that. I take for an example, I've received 2 letters from several people that are away at the present time, and they are primarily interested, how can I get an absentee ballot? Will you please explain that to me so I will be able to vote in the coming election?
Well, now, being that you're electing national offices and state offices, do you think that this will confuse the people in any way?
I don't think so. The reason I don't think so is because we have had voter registration workshops in Cumberland County, and it has been explained to them what they are doing and what is going on, so consequently it shouldn't be too much of a difficulty.
Well, because in my particular community, we have more people in that area registered than ever before. And if you are qualified registered voter, I think it'll help you in every area. In our community, we have a club there. We are organized, and so we run an improvement project there every year where we encourage the people to come out and listen to what we have to say, and then we inform them of the necessity and importance in registering voting. So for that reason, we've been able to get quite a few on registration, but more than ever before.
There have been certain organizations and fraternal organizations that have offered transportation to people that would like to go to the polls. Not only have they offered transportation, but they have offered babysitters. They have offered someone to come in if they have to have meals at a certain time to see that their meals are prepared.
Do you think that the people were aware of the importance of their vote?
In the last 2 elections, I would say, that is speaking primarily of North Carolina, there has been more awareness brought home, and that this is the one vote that will count. So consequently, I believe everyone is going to try to get out and vote. So much so until we have had in certain cases where you would had certain jobs that allowed their employees to get off in ample time so they would be able to get back to their polling places in ample time to vote.
Well, sir, do you believe that your vote is important as an individual?
I believe that my vote is important as an individual.
Why?
My vote just might be the one vote that will get my candidate in.
Do you think that the Negro vote will play a greater part in putting one particular party in?
The Negro as a whole will play an important part, and I think in playing this particular part, I don't think it's going to be more or less a race issue, but it is going to be an issue that is, this is the type of individual that we would like to have in the office, irrespective as of to race, color, or creed.
Well, now, you said that they would realize that their vote was important.
Yes, but I mean, they aren't thinking of their vote as important primarily because they are Negro. But I am thinking of my vote as being important because I am an individual and because I am a citizen, and that it is my civic responsibility to vote.
Now, do you believe that the people who did not register realized that they should have?
I'm quite sure of that. And I am more sure of that, maybe than some others, because I am working with some of the school children. The children in their civic classes have had brought home to them the importance of registering. The children are urging the parents to get out and vote. And although many of the parents were not on the books, because the children urged them to get out and vote, they have brought their parents out to vote even when they were not registered. So consequently, the parents have made a concerted effort now to get on the books. Those that were perhaps unfortunate and did not get on the books the last time, I am sure will make a concerted effort to get on the books as soon as this general election is over.
And I'm unmuting us so you can actually hear what we're saying. So Natalie,
that'll be good.
How many? You've seen this film a couple of times, correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm. I have.
So, what are this being probably the third or fourth time you've seen it? Like, what are some things that have kind of risen? Some observations that you've made?
Well, I mean, I think this most recent time that I watched, I was struck by the fact that very early on, it's clear that the upcoming election in, 1964 is a pivotal one. It's seen as a fairly consequential one by the Black citizens that are interviewed, not unlike this upcoming election in 2020. And one of the first questions we hear from one of the students talking to, I believe, the housewife, that's sitting on the grass, who, discloses that she is registered to vote, but her husband isn't, and it's not her business as to why he is not registered. The interviewer asks, well, is the election based on racial overtones? Again, striking resemblance to this upcoming election. I think the thing that really struck me, though, this time was what seems to be a deep belief on the part of Black citizens in 1964 that not only is voting a privilege as an American citizen, but that it's an essential part of first-class citizenship. So there's a way that Black people are expecting that through their ability to vote, they're going to be seen as, equal as citizens, just like anyone else. And it's just very interesting to me, and in some ways maddening, because of the voter repression, to say the least, that Black people experience throughout the 20th century, but the ways that that's still happening today, and that Black people are still targeted and still not considered first-class citizens in many ways. So just the socio-political implications of this 1964 moment are very interesting to me.
Yeah. In showing this in Fayetteville last year, it was fascinating to kind of hear. There was a professor there, and he was there as a student, and so he knew many of the people that were in the film, and he was talking about what was happening there as far as the student movement, and as far as trying to get the word out and trying to get folks to register, and that he felt like the film documented some of that pushback that you were mentioning, that some of the low skilled workers, the blue collar workers, were hesitant to vote.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's really, it's interesting that as late as 1964, that there, can I talk about behind the scenes?
Do it.
While what we were talking about?
Sure, do it.
I mean, I just think it's really, it's our history is fascinating. I will say that. And, my impression or my understanding of voting history for Black people has been that we weren't really able to vote until 1965, right, with the Voting Rights Act. But what what this film signals is that Black folks were able to vote. I'm still trying to understand how Black women were able to vote in 1964. But, I think the extent to which Black people were kept from voting makes it seem as though, as you said, that they really weren't able to vote. I mean, essentially, they weren't able to vote. Practically, they were not able to vote, even though from all appearances, Black men were able to. But because of all the different obstacles and ninja moves that were being made to keep Black people, men in particular, from being able to vote from 1900 to 1965, is it's evident in this 1964 film, because these workers who don't want to answer the students' questions don't want to answer them because they're concerned about what will happen to their livelihoods if they even indicate that they're thinking about voting.
Right.
So that history, the intimidation, the terror visited on Black folks to get them to not vote is like, it's recent. Again, it's contemporary because we're still dealing with some of that, and potentially we'll deal with that to a large extent in November. But also, I'm really fascinated by the fact that these Black women in 1964 were talking about, yes, I plan to vote. And I'm trying to figure out how they were able to, because Black women didn't get the vote in 1920. So what is that about? And was it only, as you suggested, when we're talking offline, in certain states that they weren't able to vote, and there were states that they were able to?
Right. And that's more doing some more history research. I mean, obviously, we both were like, we need to read more about this.
Definitely.
Like what was in place and what wasn't in place. One of the things that I could be misremembering, but the gentleman that they kept coming back to at the end, who has this very distinctive articulated drawl, I feel like that when I showed it in Fayetteville, they were like, yes, he was a minister, or he worked at a church. And that the churches were one of the places that were empowering people to go register and to have a voice in what was happening politically. And I think we were trying to figure out where he was living at the time, because some people were like, oh, I think I know where that is, what neighborhood that is, and all that. But it was really fascinating to show the film to people who knew what was happening at the time in Fayetteville and what was happening, both on a regional and a national level. And, the first time I watched this film, I was like, wow, things were really rough back then. But that landscape of disenfranchising voters has radically changed in the last 5 years in my mind, to the point where it's like, wow, I need to show this film all the time.
In bad ways.
Yeah. And, I think, Natalie, you were talking about some of the things that kept African Americans from voting, the Jim Crow laws, and that they weren't equally applied across the country, but some of them were the literacy test, like you couldn't vote if you couldn't pass this absurd literacy test. What were some of the other things?
The poll tax. Wow. So I cannot, I can't describe what all of these different measures that were in place to keep Black people from voting are about. But I mean, I think the most striking thing was violence. People were, Black folks were beat up, even lynched to keep them from voting, or to send a message to other Black people that you should not even try to do this. And especially in the South, the Deep South at that, because, the Black vote quite possibly could have upset the status quo if Black people had really been able to exercise their power, as voters. So.
Right. Yeah, and so the idea that there would be a police presence or guards at polling stations was off-putting, because they felt that they could be arrested, or they could, be beaten up. And that certainly comes up again when it was like, oh, well, we need to have people at the polling stations, police officers or people from the National Guard there. It's certainly kind of bringing up those same ideas. And the idea of threatening people, like there were in North Carolina, I don't know if you grew up in North Carolina, but there were times where letters were sent to certain neighborhoods, low-income African-American neighborhoods, saying that if you vote wrong, you'll go to jail. And coming up with ways to scare people.
If you vote wrong.
Yeah, if you voted in a way where you didn't, if there was a discrepancy in your address with your registration, or they just took some little minor thing and they made it into this you are potentially going to end up in jail if things are not laid out the way they're supposed to be with us. And just to intimidate, just to keep people from actually voting. Lots of shenanigans like that over the years.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, that was, it reminds me of all of the bait that's sort of been, thrown into the mix by someone who I shall not mention to make, the potential results really, whether they go one way or the other, questionable, because of potential fraud, because people, make a mistake, a legitimate one. But it's also really interesting to me, I didn't know that history North Carolina history. I'm not from here. I'm from Chicago. But I'm thinking of, several instances where it's not the same. Sorry, thinking of something else. But, just the idea of planting that seed of fear in a Black person and saying that if you get one thing wrong, you could go to jail. Yeah, that's effective. I can see that being highly effective in getting someone to decide they're going to stay at home. And I don't know, Skip, did it come across to you that there were more Black men who were not registered to vote, didn't want to talk about voting, didn't want to answer questions about voting, than Black women in the piece that
certainly it seemed like women felt more strongly about voting than the men. But that can be misleading because we don't know how many people were actually interviewed and we don't know how it was edited down. But it was interesting to see that there were more voices of women who felt it was important to vote. And more men that were like, well, no, not going to really vote, or, I'd rather not talk about it.
Yeah. Seemed like the pastors and anyone else who was considered professional were the ones who felt very strongly. I'm talking about of Black men who were pastors, Black men who were considered professional workers, were the ones who, were like, I absolutely believe in my right to vote and I will be voting.
So as a professor in talking with students, do you ever talk about films that talk about this time period in civil rights in the United States and have recommendations? Or are there good films out there?
Sorry?
Are there good recommendations of films to investigate or books to seek out that kind of talk about this
time period?
Yeah.
Specific to voting or just in terms of
just the civil rights time period. And since you're a film professor, then I know that you're going to hopefully have some good film recommendations.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think I do. So one of the things that I try to do in a couple of my courses is help use films that help to tell the true story of Black folks in particular who were demonized and marginalized during this time period, mainly because of their politics. So I have a class that I teach called Black Popular Culture. And I also teach an Intro to African American Studies course. And in both courses, I use two documentaries, one called Free Angela and All Political Prisoners, that was released in 2015 by Shala Lynch, which tells the whole story of Angela Davis arriving at UCLA, being summarily fired because she's a communist, and then, being charged as an accessory to the murder of a federal judge, and, everything that transpires after that or as a result of that, because there is a way that Angela Davis, certainly when I was growing up, she was like, radical commie, boogie woman, that you're not supposed to respect or admire. But Angela Davis to this day is a freedom fighter. And I think it's important for students to hear from her about who she is, as opposed to the media representations of who she is. And the same with the Black Panthers. There's a film that the filmmaker Stanley Nelson did, I think it was released in 2017, called The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution. And he has both women and men who were in the Black Panthers in the 60s and early 70s, talking about, what they went through, what their experience was, what the Panthers were trying to do and making the connection between the social programs that the Panthers were trying to institute and the threat that that presented. Besides all we know is that the Black Panthers were like these badass Black men in, black leather with berets and rifles. But they were trying to feed the community. They were trying to, provide medical care. They were trying to do all these things that were not being done for Black communities. And that's really what shut them down. I mean, the guns were a good excuse, but it was really what they were trying to do socially that was going to have an impact politically. Those are films that I think are very powerful, really well done, amazing stories, amazing storytelling, that speak from the perspective of the folk who lived it about this time.
Interesting. Yeah, in my collection, I've been digitizing some films that were made about Black Panther projects. There's a organization called California Newsreel that did a whole series of amazing films that I was able to digitize and put online. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting time period because, coming out at, in the 70s, growing up, Black Panthers, they're bad. They're like a radical organization like the Klan or...
they're a hate group. Yeah. They're a terrorist group. Yeah.
And so it's interesting to kind of see that history and to see where it all kind of comes from. Any other comments that you want to say? We have an audience of a bunch of people that love the film and love our discussion. Is there anything you'd like to interject?
Well, there were a couple of notes that I took and I guess there are two things. One, again, I was really kind of struck by, Black folks in aspiring to be seen as first-class citizens, as equal to white people, have, especially at this time, were invested in a type of respectability politics that has never worked for us. And that respectability politics, I think is most evident in the gentleman that is interviewed, pretty much for the whole end of the film, the pastor that's sitting, in his backyard with the beautiful fauna in the back and holding his dog. He represents a certain type of middle class or even maybe upper middle class success that I think Black folks really believed and hoped, and to some extent, sometimes do to this day, although I think in this moment of racial reckoning, that has been addressed in many ways. But I think Black folks thought, I'm just like you. Can't you see that? I've got my nice house. I've got, I got my little sweater and my button-up shirt, and I got my dog. I got my, I have all the trappings of success of the American dream. And this should be enough for you to see that I am just like you. I deserve the same rights, and I've earned them. And it's just that whole investment has never paid off. We've never reaped any sort of dividends from that approach. The other thing that I thought about was, I think I mentioned this, but just there's a certain level of discussion from the people who are interviewed about voter suppression. There is definitely a way that they are aware. You spoke to it in terms of the police presence at the polls, but it's kind of unspoken again in the way that certain of the unskilled workers, quote unquote, won't talk about it. That's voter suppression. If you're afraid of what's going to happen to you economically or in terms of your livelihood, that is absolutely voter suppression. And I guess the last thing is that, you know, one of the women, I think, towards the end of the film says that we're going to win. Oh, no, or maybe it's the narrator, but someone says that Black folks were, you know, hoping to win their basic rights by showing political strength. And I guess it's interesting to me. I don't know that there's ever been a moment in time, except maybe during Reconstruction, when there have actually been, you know, political candidates or folk in office who did something, were working towards Black progress. And so, you know, it's kind of heartbreaking, honestly, to be a Black woman in 2020 and look back at this film and see that this was the hope in 1964, and 36 years later, like, okay, Kamala Harris has been selected VP pick, but do we really have the political strength? Have we realized that yet? And, you know, I guess the saga continues. We'll see what happens in November.
56 years later.
Oh, thank you.
Because I was like, wait a minute, this came out 2 years
My math is off.
before I was born.
Off. Yes. Thank you. Yes. 56.
But yeah, you know, it seems like, yes, I would have hoped that we had gotten further. And it's frustrating. But, you know, somebody says, you know, the cost of freedom is you know, being diligent and being, you know, aware that there's constantly things that are threatening freedom, and you have to constantly be working to keep it free. There's films that came out in just after World War II that talk about, you know, hey, we just beat the Nazis, but you know what? That same thing that gave the Nazis power is strong in the United States. And we have to constantly be aware of it and fight it. And it's fascinating to see that because, you know, we're kind of on that, after World War II, we were on that afterglow of like, yay, United States is awesome, we're great. And people, educational filmmakers, point out, no, actually we have some problems and we have to address those problems. Otherwise they will erode our freedoms. So
and I think I hate to use the phrase, but I think chickens are coming home to roost in this moment.
Chickens.
And
so you mentioned ninja moves when you talked about the. I think that's really interesting term, a ninja move, to keep people from voting. Any other comments?
I wanted to ask you. You know, do you, given what you were saying about the films that you've seen, that you have in your possession right after World War II, and what educational filmmakers were saying then about what needed to happen then to not have, I think, what's happening now? Like, how do you see that? How do you see the trajectory of I guess the electorate being actively involved in ensuring that our freedoms don't erode? Do you think we have been involved, or have we like kind of slept on the job?
Well, I mean, that's the thing is, so there's this amazing film called Despotism that came out in the late 40s, and it's made by an educational film company, Cornet Films, and it shows kind of a graph, or it's like a line. It's like, here's democracy. I'm not even sure that you can see my hands, and here's despotism, and it kind of shows like what happens to create a despotic government, and it talks about distribution of wealth. It talks about a free press. It talks about the disenfranchisement of the voters. In fact, I feel compelled to show it like after we kind of wrap it up here. I might just stream it because I have it handy. And it's an awesome film because it is something that historically you would think, oh, well, we're the USA, we were great. And it's like, no, we're not great. We still have problems. And if we don't keep an eye on them, they will really be a problem for us. And part of it is voting is important, but there's other aspects of this. And one is a free press. And to see the controls of the, many newspapers being owned by one family, that your diversity and your freedom of press has gotten very narrow. To see that people are now getting their news from, mostly from Facebook is also a problem, because you don't have a sense of who is responsible for that reporting. And so it's really kind of interesting to see. And when I first saw despotism, I was like, oh boy, we're not doing so great on this graph. And we have slid even worse to this point. So, yeah, I might just show that after we kind of wrap up here. But it's after 4. Jason, do you want to pop back on? Here he is.
Yeah, I just to say to our audience who was expecting an hour, thank you for being with us. What a fascinating film and such a great conversation. Thank you so much, Natalie, for joining us for this.
Yes.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Well, we'd love to keep you on the list for returns, so you could be our first 3-time engaged.
Oh, that's right. You were on here twice. That's awesome.
I would love that.
So just as a reminder to our audience, remember to visit avgeeks.com for more info about the kinds of movies that we just watched. Check out some compilations from the libraries, just even hearing talk about other educational films that shed some light on the historical struggles that we've faced with getting everyone the freedom to do something as important as voting. You'll find more at places like avgeeks.com, archive.org, etc. Use your library and librarians to help you find those too. Our next show is on Friday, September 18th at 6 p.m. and it is called Imagination of a Black Child, featuring Professor Daryl Stover. And it'll be about educational films made by Black filmmakers or for Black audiences, or both. So tune in, and until then, you can watch previous AV Geeks at the Library shows or revisit this one through the library's website. And thank you, Skip, for hosting as always.
Yeah, and I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to go ahead and show despotism.
Yeah, so we will. This is a bonus. Those of you who wish to stick around, please do. And Natalie, thanks again.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can roughly learn along a scale running all the way from democracy to despotism. One community may be near the democracy end, another somewhere in the middle, and a third may be near the despotism end. Let's find out about despotism. This man makes it his job to study these things.
Well, for one thing, avoid the comfortable idea that the mere form of government can of itself safeguard a nation against despotism. Germany, under President Hindenburg, republic. And yet this republic, an aggressive despotism, took root and flourished under Adolf Hitler. When a competent observer looks for signs of despotism in a community, he looks beyond fine words and noble phrases.
For which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Many observers have found that 2 workable yardsticks help in discovering how near a community is to despotism: the respect scale and the power scale.
A careful observer can use a respect scale to find how many citizens get an even break. As a community moves towards despotism, respect is restricted to fewer people. A community is low on a respect scale if common courtesy is withheld from large groups of people on account of their political attitudes. If people are rude to others because they think their wealth and position gives them that right, or because they don't like a man's race or his religion. Equal opportunity for all citizens to develop useful skills is one basis for rating a community on a respect scale. The opportunity to develop useful skills is important, but not enough. The equally important opportunity to put skills to use is a further test on a respect scale. A power scale is another important yardstick of despotism. It gauges the citizens' share in making the community's decisions. Communities which concentrate decision-making in a few hands rate low on a power scale and are moving towards despotism. Like France under the Bourbon kings, one of whom said, "The state, I am the state." Today, democracy can ebb away in communities whose citizens allow power to become concentrated in the hands of bosses.
What I say goes, see? I'm the law around here.
The test of despotic power is that it can disregard the will of the people. It rules without the consent of the governed. Beyond the legal formalities of an election in measuring a community on the power scale, to see if the ballot is really free. If the citizens can vote only the way they're told, a community approaches despotism. When legislatures become ceremonial assemblies only and have no real control over lawmaking, their community rates low on a power scale. In a downright despotism, opposition is dangerous, whether the despotism is official or whether it is unofficial.
The spread of respect and power in a community is influenced by certain conditions, which many observers measure by means of the economic distribution and information scales.
If a community's economic distribution becomes slanted, its middle-income groups grow smaller, and despotism stands a better chance to gain a foothold. Where land is privately owned, one sign of a poorly balanced economy is the concentration of land ownership in the hands of a very small number of people. When farmers lose their farms, they lose their independence. This one can stay on, but not as his own boss anymore. To the extent that this condition exists throughout a nation, the likelihood of despotism is increased. In communities which depend almost entirely on a single industry, such as a factory or mine, maintaining economic balance is a challenging problem. If this condition exists over the nation as a whole, so that the control of jobs and business opportunities is in a few hands, despotism stands a good chance. Another sign of a poorly balanced economy is a taxation system that presses heaviest on those least able to pay. A larger part of a small income is spent on necessities such as food. Sales taxes on such necessities hit the small income harder. In the days of the salt tax, feudal despotisms were partly sustained by this and other forms of sales tax. A community rates low on an information scale when the press, radio, and other channels of communication are controlled by only a few people, and when citizens have to accept what they are told. In communities of this kind, despotism stands a good chance. See how such a community trains its teachers.
Bear this in mind. Young people cannot be trusted to form their own opinions. This business about open-mindedness is nonsense. It's a waste of time trying to teach students to think for themselves. It's our job to tell them.
And when teachers put such training into practice, despotism stands a good chance. These children are being taught to accept uncritically whatever they're told. Questions are not encouraged.
How can you ask such a question? Have you got a textbook?
Yes, ma'am.
Does it say here that our law courts are always just?
Yes, ma'am.
Then how dare you question the fact? Sit down.
And so we aren't surprised when...
But it must be true. I saw it in this book right here.
And if books and newspapers and the radio are efficiently controlled, the people will read and accept exactly what the few in control want them to. Government censorship is one form of control. A newspaper which breaks a government censorship rule can be suspended. It is also possible for newspapers and other forms of communication to be controlled by private interests.
I thought I told you to kill that story. It'll cost us a lot of advertising.
If that story goes out, I quit.
All right.
What sort of community do you live in? Where would you place it on a democracy-despotism scale? To find out, you can rate it on a respect scale and a power scale. And to find out what way it is likely to go in the future, you can rate it on economic distribution and information scales. The lower your community rates on economic distribution and information scales, the lower it is likely to rate on respect and power scales, and thus to approach despotism. What happens in a single community is the problem of its own citizens. But it is also the problem of us all, because as communities go, so goes the nation.